Please welcome Cleveland Clinic CEO and President, Dr. Toby Cosgrove.
Well, good afternoon and welcome. We're delighted to have you all here for our Ideas for Tomorrow. Innovation is the future of medicine. Today's guest, Mike Milken, has become a dominant force in a new medical endeavor, innovative philanthropy. He's focused hundreds of millions of dollars on medical research, sped the pace of new development, re-energized research, and new treatments and cures. He is impatient and not afraid to shake things up. Fortune magazine says that in the time it normally takes big pharmaceutical companies to bring a single new product to market, Milken has managed to increase funding dramatically, spur innovative research, attract new people to the field, get a myriad of drugs into clinical trials, and speed up science. According to Business Week, Milken is propelling himself into the future at 500 miles an hour. Esquire magazine has already named him one of the most influential persons of the 21st century. Please watch this video that tells you a little bit more about Michael Milken and his career.
Our world is shaped by its visionaries. Michael Milken is one of these visionaries.
No matter what we do, the greatest leverage we have in our society is improving the quality of life, increasing education, and creating opportunities.
His ideas have transformed business, medical research, and education. His passion for results has revolutionized the search for new cures.
I tell you, if they cure this disease, right, we're going to name this the Milken cure.
For more than 40 years, he's worked to unlock the potential of capital, intellect, and research to educate the underserved and battle disease. But first, he had to realize his own potential in business, family, and community life. Born on the 4th of July to Fern and Bernard Milken, Mike understood the value of giving at an early age. As a 10-year-old boy, he rode his bike up and down the block, collecting change for cancer research. While head cheerleader in high school, Mike received honors for achieving the highest level of community service. Graduating with highest distinction from the University of California at Berkeley and earning his MBA at Wharton School, he began to develop unique theories of finance. His insights into capital formation jolted the stagnant economy of the 1970s. Over the next 2 decades, he helped finance the growth of more than 3,200 companies that created millions of jobs. It was the beginning of one of the most prosperous eras in our nation's history. But even as he was achieving success on Wall Street in the 70s and 80s, the shadows of illness reconfirmed Mike Milken's involvement in what would become a lifelong passion: medical research. In 1982, the Milken Family Foundation was started to support medical research and education. But Mike didn't stop there. He brought the rapid pace of business to the quiet world of the laboratory, cutting the wait time for grant money, focusing on fast clinical results, making researchers more accountable, and demanding collaboration among disciplines, institutions, private industry, and academia. Beyond medical research, Mike Milken is equally passionate about education, a key, he says, to American competitiveness. His family foundation supports a host of programs aimed at enhancing education, including the Milken Educator Awards, known as the Oscars of teaching.
The single most important education element affecting a student's achievement is the quality of the teacher in the classroom. Good teachers really do make a difference.
Restless, inquisitive, driven to find answers.
Mike is one of those rare human beings that can see into the future. He has gifts intellectually that were not given to most people on this planet. He can look around the corner, and yet he has the capacity in his life to care for all of his friends.
I'm very thankful for the Prostate Cancer Foundation and Mike Milken for directing me in the right way.
Very rarely do you meet anyone like Malcolm Milken that is that generous.
Michael Milken is uniting the powers of business, science, and education to create a healthier, smarter, more prosperous world.
Please help me welcome Michael Milken. We're delighted to have you here.
Well, it's great to be with you today, and I can assure you I'm the happiest person to be here. About 16 years ago, they gave me a year to live, and I couldn't feel better, and it's exciting to be able to be here in 2009. So today, I thought we would take a little journey back in time and take a look at the future together. So I thought we might start with a quick look at the last 13.7 billion years on Earth that has brought us here to the Cleveland Clinic. So let's maybe take a quick look at that period of time. So in a couple minutes, we look back 13.7 billion years, and part of our effort today together is to try to look forward. But as we reflect on those past achievements, it's interesting to think about what are some of the great achievements in history. The invention of the wheel, the development of agriculture, printing press, the concept that the earth revolved around the sun, industrial and technology. But for me, the greatest achievement in history is the extension of life. 1 out of every 3 Americans born in 1900 did not live to celebrate their 5th birthday. It's just hard to believe that was not that long ago from that standpoint. And when we think about this expansion in life from 26 years of age in 1820, so all of civilization, by 1820, average life expectancy on planet Earth was 26 years. 80 years later, it grew to 31. And by 2004, the average life expectancy for the entire planet reached 66 years of age. And so when we think back to that period of time in 1900, when 1 in 5 American babies born did not celebrate their 5th birthday, and no matter how powerful you were, the most powerful office in the world, the President of the United States, 1 in 3 presidents of the United States lost a child before their 5th birthday. Leading cause of death in 1900, pneumonia, tuberculosis, diarrhea, those 3 were more than 30% of the causes for why everyone died. Year 2000, heart disease, cancer, stroke, 60% of all deaths in the country. And so the advances of medicine, the extension of life, it is easy to see, if you do the numbers, that 50% of all economic growth in the history of the world can be traced to medical advances. Now, it isn't just how long we live, but the quality of life. If we looked at how in the 1960s, you would find a woman depicted in the media. So it wasn't that many years ago that we look at that 60-year-old woman up there. Today, let's see how women are depicted in the media, and our 60-year-old has moved to 90. And so we're going to live longer. In fact, in terms of health, an 80-year-old man next year will be in similar health into a 60-year-old man in 1975. And so, yes, 80 is the new 60. And in 2010, a 60-year-old woman would be very similar to what a 40-year-old woman was in 1960. Now, there's a lot of progress, but we still have a differential to close here in that a 70-year-old woman will still be equivalent to a 65-year-old man, and maybe that's why we see so many women dating younger men today. When you step back and try to look at what is a very difficult chart, this chart created by Robert Fogel, Nobel Prize winner of the University of Chicago, it shows you a number of things. One, population growth on planet Earth was really negligible for almost 11,000 years. And then something happened in this 1820 period of time. It's pretty hard to have economic growth with life expectancy at 26 years. If we look a little closer at this period from 1820 to 2009, you'll see a number of discoveries that occurred. Germ theory, penicillin, the Salk vaccine, discovery of DNA, heart transplants, etc. And so most of this economic growth can be traced to these issues in curing disease, controlling disease, improving the quality of life and length of life. There's enormous discussion this year around the world on stimulus. I'd like to show you 2 of the greatest stimulus we have in our society and for the entire world. They just start with cancer and heart disease. The elimination of cancer and heart disease is worth almost $100 trillion to the U.S. economy. So when we measure stimulus, there is really no greater stimulus than we could provide to the U.S. economy today and to the world's economy, but to eliminate cancer and heart disease as a cause of death and suffering, whether it becomes chronic disease, but the impetus to our economy. Work done by Kevin Murphy, who won the award as the leading young economist in the world, and Bob Topal, showed that improvements in life expectancy added $2.6 trillion per year over a 28-year period of time to the national wealth of the United States. How do you measure that? How do you see that Let's just take one small example to think back over in time. About 4.5 years ago, Genentech announced that, and the FDA announced that they had approved Avastin for lung cancer treatment. Not a cure, an improvement in quality of life for some patients, an improvement in length in life for others, but not a cure. 1 hour after the announcement, the stock went up $11 to $12 billion in value because of the announcement that this one drug, this concept of anti-angiogenesis, had applications now in lung cancer. And 1 month later, when the announcement came out on breast cancer, the stock went up again $11 to $12 billion, more than any other pharmaceutical company in the world, more than any other biotech company in the world. Genentech created almost $100 billion by identifying changes in treatment and drugs to deal with those issues. Small example of overall ability. So today I thought I might talk about 4 topics with you: building human capital, changing priorities, recent financial markets, and accelerating medical solutions. So I think, as we heard, wherever I go, there's generally a commotion. So this is a very peaceful setting that we're in today. And yes, I chose to go to Berkeley in 1964 because I could see the entire world from Berkeley's campus. Right there in Telegraph and Berkeley, and where Bancroft came together, there was the Free Love Society table, the American Communist Party, American Nazi Party, right next to each other. At that time in Berkeley, the Free Love Party was by far the most popular party at Berkeley. And shortly after I arrived, we had the free speech movement, the movement of the first year that the baby boomers went to college. People that their parents said one person could make a difference, one person could change the world. And students from this generation started going to college in 1964. And as you know, dramatic changes occurred in governance in college, relationships of students, etc. But for me, being a math and physics major at Berkeley changed dramatically when I returned to Los Angeles and found Los Angeles on fire. August 11th, 1965. You didn't have to go to Vietnam. Los Angeles had armed personnel carriers on the streets, and the city was ablaze. A city of dreams, a city where I felt little to no discrimination growing up. It was hard for me, who knew everything at 19, to understand what was occurring. And that night and the next day, I met some young African-American men, particularly one, in the middle of the civil rights movement in the 1960s, that told me he was not part of the American dream. His father had no access to capital. He, because he was African-American, black, would not have access to capital. And he watched a building that he worked in burn down as a distant reminder that he was part of the capitalist system. So I went back to Berkeley, changed my major to business to try to figure out why were people not receiving capital. And I eventually concluded that access to capital based on your ability is a civil right, the same as where you could sit on a bus, where you could go to school, where you could eat. And in the middle of this movement, went back and studied credit at Berkeley and came up with my little formula that I notice most of you are not carrying around with you today. But that formula basically said that prosperity, creating jobs in a society, operated with a multiplier effect: financial access to capital, financial technologies, a series of them, on human capital plus social capital plus real assets, with the major asset of society being human capital, the next one being social capital, medical institutions, educational institutions, rule of law, and the last one being real assets, what you think of as bricks and mortar factories, etc. Human capital is the largest asset class The greatest collection of human capital in this part of the country lies right here at the Cleveland Clinic. Right here. It is one of the national treasures of America and the world. The financial results are put out every 6 months by the Federal Reserve. This is what your balance sheet looks like. And yes, they tell us that household assets at the end of June totaled $67 trillion in America. But Gary Becker of the University of Chicago won a Nobel Prize in 1992 telling us that is the wrong balance sheet. And most of the value in the country, in the balance sheet of the country, is found in the ability of individuals, the human and social capital and infrastructure that differentiates one society from another, and the talent and the productivity of one individual from another. And Gary Becker pointed out that is worth at least three-quarters of the value, if you wanted to quantify it, of the United States. Subsequent work has suggested that that number is maybe as high as 95%. Can one person make a difference? I have the luxury every year to come to Cleveland and visit 29 other cities periodically for our Home Run Challenge, raising money for cancer research every year, this being our 14th year. Sometimes getting throughout the first ball, and for many years seen some of the great games here. This year I saw a pitcher named Lee beat a great pitcher from St. Louis, Carpenter, 1-0 during our session. As you all know, you get to see Lee drive the Phillies into the World Series. Unfortunately, not the Cleveland Indians this year. But one person can make a difference, and let's take a minute as I reflect on my baseball travels to go back in time to look at one of the other teams in the World Series tonight, the New York Yankees. Well, there was two teams, the New York Yankees and the Boston Red Sox, and you might have different opinions about Boston and New York, etc. But between 1914 and 1919, the Yankees did not go to the World Series once, and Boston went to the World Series 1 out of every 2 years. Now, Boston had a player who played for it during the 6 years. His name was Babe Ruth. He hit 49 home runs, had over 300 batting average, won 87 games, and in 3 World Series appearances, today still has the lowest ERA, gave up the least runs per game of any pitcher who has ever pitched in the World Series. No one exactly knows why, but for some reason, the Boston Red Sox decided to trade Babe Ruth to the New York Yankees. So in the next 14 years that Babe Ruth played for the New York Yankees went to the World Series 1 out of every 2 years. They went 7 times, and Boston went 0. So we all know about Babe Ruth and the New York Yankees, but when we step back and think about his career in baseball, he played 20 seasons. He went to the World Series 1 out of every 2 seasons, and it really didn't make any difference whether he was playing for the Boston Red Sox or the New York Yankees. Easy to see what one person can do. In 1975, there were 130 doctors and scientists here at the Cleveland Clinic. And a young man named Toby Cosgrove came here to the Cleveland Clinic. You're Babe Ruth. Today, there's more than 2,000 scientists and doctors here. Maybe you didn't see it as clearly as the Yankees did. Now, what else changes when you bring talent? Well, let's look at attendance of the New York Yankees. There seemed to be a positive, dramatic increase and more than a tripling of attendance at the New York Yankees after Babe Ruth was traded, and no change at the Boston Red Sox. Do human capital strategies work? They've sure worked here at the Cleveland Clinic. What about a country? Has a country ever tried this strategy? Let's take a look. If we go back to the 1960s, there were 2 countries, Singapore and Jamaica. Similar size, similar population, similar weather. Both were part of the British Commonwealth. Both received independence in the 1960s. Both had per capita income very similar. Lee Kuan Yew of Singapore went and flew to Jamaica to visit with the leadership of Jamaica. Jamaica's strategy was tourism, natural resources, agriculture for the growth of their country. Lee Kuan Yew went back to Singapore and decided the future of his country, lacking natural resources, was based on attracting the best and brightest people in the world to come to Singapore and to educate the citizens of Singapore to the highest level in the world. A-plus scholars' pictures are on the corners, not the rock stars of Singapore. Well, let's see what happens over a period of almost 40 years. Today, per capita income in Singapore approaches $39,000, making it one of the highest in the world. And per capita income in Jamaica approaches $5,300. If you look at all history over long periods of time, there is no country that is ultimately led that was based on a natural resource society. Ultimately, it is based on the ability and talent of your people, and no one today would confuse a great country of Jamaica with an even greater country of Singapore. I don't know if any of you have ever visited Lake Tahoe, but if you have, Singapore is about the size of Lake Tahoe. Someone has built one of the great countries of the world based on human capital in just that small area. When we think about the 21st century, and I look forward, I think it's going to be defined as a century of worldwide competition for human capital. People can move. How do you attract them? Many of you might have met Philip Yeo. I'm sure he isn't the #1 favorite person for Toby, and that his job is to run around the world and try to convince the best and brightest to leave where they are today and move to Singapore. And he has been very successful in recruiting many of the world's scientists by providing them laboratory space, a lot of young scientists, living conditions, and increased compensation to come to Singapore. China is on the same path with their ZPAC and their innovative concepts today. So there's a lot of ways to build human capital. Education, healthcare, access to scientific knowledge, increasing opportunities for women, and incentives that attract skilled immigrants. Like many of you, I've spent a good part of my life trying to figure out, can we create institutions that attract great individuals to come to those institutions that can change society? But the core idea in all of these is, can you find that individual that can change the world? Education, something that all of us fully recognize the importance. In the United States of America today, we sometimes forget what things were like during the happy days of the 1950s and 60s. But during that period of time, 60% of all the jobs in the United States were unskilled. And 80% of all the jobs were semi-skilled or unskilled. A middle-class family, sending your kids to college, 2 cars and a home, all were possible with a willingness to work hard and not having a skill. That world no longer exists in America and for many countries in the world today, with only 15% of the jobs in America now in the unskilled area. It isn't often cited as a reason for the enormous growth in the United States over the past century. But between 1880 and 1960, adults added almost 1 year of additional education for all citizens per decade. Yes, by 1960, the average American had 8 years of more formal schooling than they did 80 years ago, 80 years before in 1880. In fact, by 1960, the highest average grade level on average in America was 2 years more than any other country in the world. The United States was by far the most educated country in the world, primarily educated for generations by women who lacked other opportunities, who graduated from the top of their class. And that is why when we thought about what can we do for the teaching profession many years ago, our idea was to create the Academy Awards of Teaching, to award teachers for excellence. And today, a few miles away from here in high school, we surprised another teacher here in the state of Ohio, our 58th, with an award, and all 1,500 students in that school were there that day to see the state superintendent, previous Milken National Education Award winners come. But remember that a teacher was honored that day. And so when they think about a career, maybe they'll think about being a teacher. The Milken Institute's efforts as a public charity are to improve the lives and economic conditions of diverse populations in both the U.S. and the world, help business and policy leaders come up with new ideas. We do this throughout the year, and then we bring people from 60 countries to spend 4 or 5 days together to focus on these areas, and we've been lucky to have Toby, Cosgrove, and other representatives of the Cleveland Clinic join us there, and other speakers that have come to this program. In the for-profit area, we concluded by 1995 that nonprofit alone would not be able to lift educational systems around the world, and formed a company called Teacher Universe. And luckily, we're able to add a company called Children's Creative Learning Centers, whose most prestigious location in the world is running the early child education program for the Cleveland Clinic. Why early child care education? Another Nobel Prize winner, James Heckman, completed a study which showed that $1 invested in a 5-year-old has the same rate of return as $3 invested in a 15-year-old, $5 in a 22-year-old, and $10 in a 30-year-old. So if you're going to invest in education and allocate your funds, and you have limited funds, whether you're a parent or a family or a government, you want to allocate them as early as possible to those students. It's interesting when you look at China versus the United States today. In China, they spend substantially more on early child care education than they do on college. So they might spend, if you're in Beijing today, 4 times as much money on the early child care education than they do on college. In the United States, we obviously have the inverse. We recently opened a center in the San Francisco area, in Silicon Valley at Cisco, that has 400 children in it. And it's really interesting in that more than 50% of those children, parents were born in India, in Silicon Valley. But it isn't that much of a surprise when you realize today that 15% of all the technology venture capitals, companies that are financed, 15% of those companies are headed by a CEO that was born in India, and another 15% are headed by CEOs that were born in India and Taiwan, and just how important immigration has been. In looking at world economies and countries around the world, there was a major study done by a number of organizations, including the World Bank, that looked at the rate of return of investment in education. On this slide that you have in front of you here, the yellow is the government and the greenish blue is the family or the individual. But as you can see here, rates of return approaching 18% for government. After sanitation, the highest rate of return for governments around the world is investing in early child care education and elementary education. Many years ago, when I was diagnosed with prostate cancer, I had been funding cancer for more than 20 years, but knew absolutely nothing about prostate cancer. I could talk to you about breast cancer and melanoma and other forms of cancer, but I was thrust into an environment where I knew very little about cancer. So as you think about forming new organizations, we formed an organization called CAP-CURE. The CA was for cancer, the P was for prostate, and cure was for all diseases. And having many other pleasant and unpleasant experiences, I concluded that we could not form this organization and drive medical research in America if other organizations felt we were going to divert funds from their particular disease to prostate cancer. So the goal was to double the NIH budget, triple the NCI budget, and increase tenfold the funding for prostate cancer. Today, those groups have been broken into three parts. C-Change, which is kind of the United Nations of cancer. P became the Prostate Cancer Foundation, and Cure became Faster Cures. In 1995, we developed a plan of attack with the help of almost 50 different world leaders in medical research. Some of those ideas were to internationalize the war on cancer, invest more, recruit world-class scientific teams, push technology, mobilize patients, get product to the market faster, accelerate new drugs, ideas which I believe each one of you, most of them you would have thought of yourself, but how to implement them. Dialing back 10 to 15 years, we came up with an idea. Who wants to spend 9 months creating a report and then wait a year and a half to find out if you're approved, and then have to implement a program that you might know is already outdated? So the idea was very simple. We only promised to read the first 5 pages. You could send us 9 feet, you could send us 1,800 pages, but we only promised to read the first 5. Next, we told you we would make a decision in 60 days and fund in 90. That attracts the best and brightest, since they know that they can get funded on an idea, and they know whether they're funded or not. As I went to Johns Hopkins in early 1993, I met a young doctor-scientist named Jonathan Simons, who decided he was going to go work in the field of prostate cancer. He had been at Princeton, Harvard, Cambridge, and was now at Hopkins, and was told by a number of people, a promising career. Why would he want to work in prostate cancer? It's career suicide. There's no money. Luckily, we met shortly after he was told it was career suicide, and I told him he luckily picked the best career, and I assured him there would be funding available, as we promised $25 million that day. How do you approach a problem? Lee Hood and others, how do you get data? It took Hopkins 12 years to accumulate data when more than one person had prostate cancer in the family. Well, we went on Larry King. It took a little discussion with my good friend Ted Turner to convince him that people would actually watch a show on cancer and would not be depressed and turn it off, and to make sure we brought on General Schwarzkopf to call everyone to action that night. And in 30 days, we collected more knowledge on more families, where more than 2 people in the family had prostate cancer than anyone had ever collected in 12 years, just simply using media and television. Now, we had some people that called to report to action because they saw General Schwarzkopf. We asked them, did you have prostate cancer? No. Has anyone in your family had prostate cancer? No. Then we asked them, well, why are you calling? Because they saw General Schwarzkopf and wanted to sign up to fight cancer. Annual retreats, getting that idea around and making sure it's implemented. Well, it's a very simple thing. Are you going to share your work with others? Many people told us their work was too important to share. And I fully and others understood that. Our money was only for people whose work was not that important. Okay, everyone whose work was too important to share could obviously be funded by everyone else. What was amazing, within 6 months, everyone decided they could share. They could share their findings from that standpoint. Creating a therapy consortium, data banks, tissue banks, and introducing a new concept, the concept of nutrition. But after 5 years, we still had not been successful in doubling the NIH budget, tripling the NCI, and therefore we needed a march. As you know, when you want to change things, you need a march. It was an election year. It was an exciting year. 250,000 to 500,000 people coming to Washington. And we were able to go and record many of the leading senators and congressmen and women of our country on their views on cancer and funding of cancer research. Many of them were so passionate, it was hard not to break into tears. After the event was over and the Vice President hosted us, we let everyone know that we had distributed their audio and visual to all their local television and radio stations, just in case they didn't remember their enthusiasm at the time for supporting cancer research. And as we brought in Anna Barker and Andy von Eschenbach and others, we eventually had a doubling of the NIH with the help of so many others, including people here at the Cleveland Clinic, and a tripling of the NCI. With Anna Barker, who had headed our research effort in the March, moving eventually into the NCI with Andy von Eschenbach. As I reflect on 30 to 40 years of giving money and focusing on trying to move medical research along, I would say to you that the greatest return on our investment has been an investment in young investigators. Finding individuals young in their career who are deciding what path to follow, funding them on a career path for a very small investment, getting the world's brightest individuals and the future who can eliminate cancer and complete our goal of eliminating cancer and heart as a cause of death in the United States. The world has changed dramatically. In '93, if you went to a scientific retreat, people generally were in two backgrounds. One, a molecular biologist, and another, MD. So we had some PhDs and an MD. By 2009, similar to this room and other meetings here at the Cleveland Clinic, the group who attend this conferences to try to figure out what we're going to do includes chemists and clinicians and engineers, statisticians, and in attempting to create a team that could move things along, we often turn to those individuals that worked on the programs of sending a probe to Mars or other parts of the universe in order to bring on diverse groups of engineers, scientists together for those efforts. Whether it's the Melanoma Research Alliance or whether it was the Parkinson's Foundation, Michael J. Fox, we've worked hard to initiate fast-track medical specific organizations. But during this particularly last 15 to 16 years, the thing that has really struck me is that maybe 70% in the United States of all healthcare costs are lifestyle related. It is not what you inherited, it is how you chose to live your life, what you eat, how you exercise. And a couple years ago, we put out a report that's available on the web at the milkeninstitute.org, led by the head of our regional studies group, Ross Duvall, on an unhealthy America and the staggering cost for failing to contain the containable and the diversion of the best and brightest in our country to take care of issues and increase in certain chronic diseases due to the change in the physique of Americans. And the cost by 2006-07 cost America $1 trillion. And that is just the change in weight of men and women in America between 1991 and 2006. And we only looked at 7 categories: diabetes, heart disease, hypertension, stroke, cancer, pulmonary and mental disorders. And you wonder, why does it take so long in America to cause change? Well, America is the leading country in advertising and marketing. There was this little report that came out in the late 1930s that suggested there was some link between smoking and your health. And whether it was 39 or when it was in 40, by 1986, 45 years plus later, the most valuable brand in the world was Marlboro. 46 years later. So you ask yourself, why did it take so long to cause this change? So we ask ourselves, and we ask you, who told you to smoke? Well, Hall of Fame baseball players told you to smoke in those ads. Famous actresses told you you should be smoking. And I think all of us, when you see a movie from the 1930s, 40s, 50s, and 60s, you wonder, does anyone not smoke? How could they have time to talk or anything else? They have to light up a cigarette. Soldiers and sailors taught you to smoke. Unfortunately, doctors taught you to smoke. Of course, dentists taught you to smoke. And even medical researchers taught you to smoke, because when you were looking in those microscopes, it was much clearer if you had a cigarette in your hand. Okay, well, we're a knowledgeable group, so we have some participation now. Who has not told us to smoke cigarettes? One of these four groups did not tell us to smoke cigarettes. Either babies, Santa Claus, Supreme Court justices, or president. So now it's time for a show of hands. How many of you think babies did not tell us to smoke? Looks like almost half the audience. Okay. How about Santa Claus? How many of you think Santa Claus didn't tell us to smoke? Okay, very few of you have faith in Santa Claus, I can see. Okay, what about presidents? How many of you think presidents didn't tell us we should be smoking? Less than 5. And how many of you think Supreme Court justices didn't tell us to smoke? About 10 of you. Okay, well, let's see how you did. Well, those that voted for babies, I'm sorry to tell you. Babies taught us to smoke. And those that voted for presidents, I'm sorry to tell you, presidents told us to smoke. And those of you who've said Santa Claus didn't tell us to smoke, I'm sorry to tell you that Santa Claus told us to smoke. And so the only group that didn't tell us to smoke were Supreme Court justices. Now, and therefore, when you think about nutrition and change in lifestyle and how difficult it is for America, I want to show you a typical ad in America from, say, 50 or so years ago.
You know, if you were to follow a busy doctor as he makes his daily round of calls, you'd find yourself having a mighty busy time keeping up with him. Time out for many men of medicine usually means just long enough to enjoy a cigarette. And because they know what a pleasure it is to smoke a mild, good-tasting cigarette, they're particular about the brand they choose. In a repeated national survey, doctors in all branches of medicine, doctors in all parts of the country were asked, "What cigarette do you smoke, doctor?" Once again, the brand named most was Camel. Yes, according to this repeated nationwide survey, more doctors smoke Camels than any other cigarette. Why not change to Camels for the next 30 days and see what a difference it makes in your smoking enjoyment? See how Camels agree with your throat. See how mild and good-tasting a cigarette can be.
So you can see, if you smoked, you not only have a doctor that does house calls, but the doctor has a very attractive assistant. So we had an entire society focused on this. So this effort on nutrition that we've put forth in the 15 years and the fact that there might be some link between what you eat and what you smoke and your daily activity, we have not made as much progress as I would like to tell you we've made. Yes, we've been able to reduce the death rate from prostate cancer and other cancers as much as 50% in the last 15 years. But here's another example of California today. This is Orange County and some of our difficulties in the fitness area. We've even tried cartoons in our effort. This was one of my favorite cartoons here. What fits your busy schedule better, exercising 1 hour a day or being dead 24 hours a day? So America today, when we talk about health care, is quite different from any other part of the world. Today, 36% of Americans would be defined as obese, and men, and 41, almost 42% of all women in America. And as you can see here, that is dramatically higher even than Mexico, almost double the UK, almost double Germany, 6 to 7 times France, and more than 20 times Japan and China. There's a lot of causes, not the least of which is the size of our portions today. Hot dogs, for example, in the United States are 63% larger in portion size than France. So when you look at a portion, here for Americans, even though there's some similarities between individuals and human beings in France and the United States, in the United States we need our hot dogs 63% bigger. Yogurt, a carton of yogurt in the United States is 82% bigger than the portion size in France. So that country that had the lowest level of obesity, Japan, 1.8% for men, 1.5% for women, decided they had to draw a line in the sand at 2%. Japan has the longest life expectancy of any country in the world, and by far the longest healthy life expectancy, 7 to 9 years longer than men and women in the United States. They could not afford to have obesity rates go to 2%, 1/20th of the United States. So what did they do? Their objective was to reduce the overweight population by 10% in 4 years and 25% in 7. Their strategy, they would measure every person's waistline between 40 and 74, something I'm sure that you agree that all Americans would quickly agree to. The cutoff for men is 32 inches. If your waist is over 32 inches, you undergo nutritional counseling. The penalty, impose financial penalties on companies and local governments if they don't have improvement. Football, this is the #1 American pastime, professional sports. In the very first Super Bowl won by the Green Bay Packers, it's kind of amazing to think that we even would watch the game, but the average offensive lineman only weighed 250 pounds. By 2009, the average offensive lineman weighed 315 pounds. So we were able to have almost a 30% increase in the amount people weighed during this period of time. In 1980, there was not one player in the National Football League that weighed 300 pounds. 14 years later, 80, and by 2009, 300 players weighed 300 pounds. And this year, the Philadelphia Eagles starting offensive line, the average weight is 340 pounds. It would take at least thousands of years of evolution to adjust to this gain in weight. So yes, we've put out cookbooks, and I was not that excited when I saw this commercial at the Super Bowl. Let's take a look at our progress in nutrition.
Warren Sapp is a Pro Bowl defensive tackle. Warren Sapp is a hungry man. Packed with extra-large portions of the food men love, Hungry Man satisfies even the biggest appetites. Hungry Man, it's good to be full.
Okay, so I don't know how many of you had your Hungry Man breakfast. I thought I'd show you what it looks like here. Okay, so at breakfast you can get 550 calories from fat. You can get more than 103% of your saturated fat out of the way just by breakfast. You can get 1,790 milligrams of sodium. You can pick up your cholesterol right out of the box in the morning and pick up 1,170 calories with just breakfast. So yes, we've put out 2 cookbooks trying to tell you you can eat the exact same food. We're just going to change the ingredients. We've had contests whether you could tell there was a difference. There's a lot of reports out, but the country has so much work to do in this area. And if we're going to eventually eliminate cost and change America, we've tried to change America's physique. We have to focus on prevention, and we have to focus on cure. Changing priorities. There's a big change in the world today. The United States is still the world's largest economy, Japan second, China third. As China's currency increased in value and grows, China sometime in the next 12 to 18 months will be the second largest economy in the world. As we look to the future, the Milken Institute, other organizations have estimated something that I think all of us realize today by differing growth rates, that China will be the world's largest economy, the United States second, India third, Brazil and Indonesia and Mexico moving into the top 10 list. That might not be a surprise to you either, but I think if we reflect back to 1820, at the start of this scientific revolution in world trade, China and India made up almost 45% of the world's economy, and for almost all of the last 2,000 to 3,000 years, China and India made up 40% of the world's economy. CLSA, based out of Hong Kong, put out a report on Mr. and Mrs. China, a fascinating report that we'll provide to all of you to look at. And what was so interesting about this report is they interviewed 35,000 families, middle-class families in 11 Asian countries, as to what was important to them, how they spend their money, what is their utility curve, how do they feel about their children, how do they feel about their government. Looking at the comparisons of those countries, in the United States, by 2007, the average middle-class family was spending 50% of their income on housing and transportation. 50%. In Asia, the average middle-class family was spending 16% of their income on housing and transportation. The size of the house and what their car looked like was not that important. What was important was education and tutoring of their children. In Asia, 15% of family income is spent on the tutoring of particularly one child. In China and Korea particularly, they spend 15%. They spend 50% more on the tutoring of one child than they do on housing. And a dramatic change occurred in America in the size of our houses. So Americans got bigger and our houses got bigger. And so we've gone from 1,500 square feet to almost 2,500 square feet for the average size of a middle-class family home in America. If you look at that compared to Asia, in Hong Kong it's 500 square feet for a family of 4. In Singapore, the largest, it's 1,200 square feet. But I think it's very easy to see what's going to happen in America. The trend has already begun. We're going to spend relatively less on housing, cars, transportation, consumables, and a much larger portion of household income for first savings, second allocated education, medical research. Living in a smaller house that is cancer-free with well-educated kids sure beats living in a big house, and I think Americans have already started to vote in that direction and move in that direction and need to be recognized that this is a dramatic change, not in 2009, but for the next 10 to 20 years in America. Jumping forward here, accelerating medical solutions. Can we actually accelerate medical solutions? Is it possible to do that? There's been a constant debate on this area. Is it intuition? Is it brute force? Is it science that brings to bear? A number of years ago, as part of the Milken Institute, we created Faster Cures, an organization dedicated to shortening the time to find cures and better treatments for all life-threatening diseases. The concept was simple. Science is a train. Trains in the world today, technology allows them to travel at 300 miles an hour. And whether you're taking that train in Shanghai in from the airport or in parts of Europe, trains today bear little to any relationship to forms of transportation. In the United States, however, the average train today travels at the same speed it did 100 years ago. It has nothing to do with the science in this area. It has to do with 19th and 20th century tracks that train is running on, and 19th and 20th century thinking. It's hard for science to move at the speed it needs to move when the regulations, the legislation, and many institutions in our country were created for the 19th and 20th century and not for technology in the 20th century. So the idea of Faster Cures was not to do medical research, but to spur and create and lay new tracks so the people doing medical research, translational research, and basic research could move faster in the world and in the United States. The PhD program, people helping doctors, collecting data, being part of this effort. The TRAIN program, basic research acceleration, not making the same mistakes from one organization from time and time again. Biobanks so that you'd have access to data. At Berkeley, when I wanted to study what happened in financial markets in a previous 70 to 80 years, I could go to the computer and get a data set. Cost to me zero as a student at Berkeley. I could test my theories and analyze what occurred. And I discovered that the best credit were small and medium businesses that were growing and afforded you the best rate of return. The worst credits were countries who were constantly defaulting, and the analysis of credit was incorrect. I didn't have to spend hundreds of millions of dollars to create a data set. Master students, PhDs, MDs, scientists, having available to them data sets that they can test their theories on. The Philanthropy Advisory Service of this public charity, Faster Cures, allows people to say, how can my dollars be most effectively used? If I'm interested in a disease, a scientist, a strategy of stem cells, for example, where could I get the greatest rate of return on my money? And lastly, partnering for cures. We have a session in New York for 3 days, December 1st, 2nd, and 3rd, and we welcome you to it. What can we learn with partnering with others to speed our efforts? Uniting the power of philanthropy, the passion for medical research, the expertise of biotechnology and pharmaceutical companies to catalyze a more effective and efficient medical research enterprise. Medical philanthropy is a very small part of the puzzle. It's estimated it runs around 3%. How can 3% make a difference? It makes all the difference in the world. The idea that you're going to support an idea, a concept that hasn't been proven, serves as an enormous ability to leverage your efforts. And while industry and governments provide most of the money, when I reflect on our Prostate Cancer Foundation, for every dollar that we've raised, we were able to leverage it 30-fold. So our $400 million that we've raised turn into raising almost $12 billion in expenditures. This is the difference. There is short-term stimulus, creating jobs, building bridges. But a message I want to leave with you today is the long-term stimulus. 1,000 to 1 leverage, 1,000,000 to 1 leverage is medical research and solving the problems. If we can cure disease, we will substantially reduce the cost. we will extend the quality of life and the length of life. And whereas much of the 20th century was defined by applications of physics, the 21st century will be defined by applications of biology and chemistry. Theodore Roosevelt said, "Far and away the best prize that life offers is a chance to work hard at work worth doing." I can't think of anything more rewarding than being able to participate, encourage, fund, initiate those on this discovery, the courage of patients that are in clinical trials to help them solve problems that have not been solved in medicine. It's my view that it's our legacy, my generation's legacy, an unbelievable legacy left by my parents, what Tom Brokaw and others defined, as the greatest generation, who fought in World War II. Some fought in World War I. They lived through the Depression. They gave every single one of us an opportunity of freedom. And so for me, our opportunity, and one of the greatest institutions in the world, the Cleveland Clinic today, is to try to create a legacy that relegates cancer and other life-threatening diseases to the history books. Our children will have plenty of challenges in the future. One of the ones they do not need is cancer and other life-threatening diseases. The science is available, and I look forward to being around to see the culmination of the day when no one dies from cancer and no one particularly dies from heart disease. Thank you for letting me join you today.
Will you wait here for just a minute?
Sure.
Mike, I want to thank you very much, and we've got time for just two questions before we leave. If anybody who has one, you raise their hand, and here's one over here, and push the microphone. There's a little button right there in front of you. If you push that, you have a microphone at your seat.
Thank you very much. What's your view on debate about healthcare reforms, and also, if you may, generously, your view on economy? Thank you.
Okay, quickly, healthcare reform. I think
that's two questions.
The debate we're seeing right now, I think we all recognize, is highly political. One side wants a bill almost at any cost, and the other side doesn't want a bill at almost any cost. And I think, as I try to put forth today, there are two ways to control health care costs in America. One, prevention. We have to try to find a way to get America back to at least the weight of 1991. Okay, it isn't that hard. We have to get the concept of physical education back in our middle schools and high schools. Only 29% of children in high school in America today participate in physical activity once a week or more. Only 29%, and only 39% of those in middle school. And so prevention and nutrition and all these things we know so much more about today at a molecular level, we need to put to work, and we can't expect our costs to be similar to other countries when we have totally different physical human beings we're dealing with here. If 7-year-old children, we've had a 10-fold increase in children 7 that weigh 100 pounds, and a 10-fold increase in children that are 12 that weigh 200 pounds, we don't even know what the cost is of that substantial increase in weight of young people in America. We do know that we get type 2 diabetes at a much younger age. Lastly, we need to go to cure. The concept that you're going to spend 99 cents on care or 97 cents on care, and 1 to 2 to 3 cents on cure just doesn't make sense no matter what you're thinking about. And so I think we have to focus on that. I'm hoping, and I'm very optimistic, that once they figure out a bill, that we're going to have a significant focus also on prevention and on care. But right now, it's hard to get those points across because we're in a very political center on this bill. The economy, I'm very optimistic on the economy. What most people don't realize is that in the 1970s, America built an immune system unique to America. That immune system was that banks stopped lending money in the 1970s. And this period we're in right now is a repeat of 1973 to 1977. And if you want to, you can go back and study what happened during that period of time. What is this immune system? It is the public and private markets. More money has been raised this year than ever before in history. And by the end of this year, we might have close to $3 trillion raised worldwide for businesses, companies that pushed out debt. So I am optimistic. When you read the newspaper in America, you get a much different feeling. You get depressed, things are difficult, and these are very difficult times for a large percentage of our population who has lost their jobs. But for most of the world, this is the greatest year of wealth creation in history. In Peru, their stock market's up 118% in US dollars, Brazil 115, Chile 97, Argentina 81, Turkey 96. These are unbelievable changes. South Korea, Mexico. The United States and Europe and Japan have lagged the rest of the world. But this is a constant shift of the world's economy to these other countries. And so many of these people have substantial wealth which will help in medical research. But the U.S. economy, first, residential housing is stabilized, second, industrial companies, and in the next couple years we will stabilize the prices of commercial real estate. So I am very optimistic. It's a very difficult period of time. But if you want to see the future of our country, the future of our country is in the classrooms of America. You can go and visit them. It's in the elementary schools and the middle schools. And we need a wake-up call relative to the rest of the world. We led the world for more than a century in education and commitment. Unfortunately, we've lost that lead, and to most developed and in increasingly developing countries, things have changed. And so that is the future of America in our classrooms and will be the future of our economy. So thank you very much. Thank you.
Well, on behalf of all of you, I want to thank Mike for an absolutely fascinating hour. This could go on for many more hours, but unfortunately, I think we need to call it a day. I'd just like to thank you all for being here and remind you that 2 weeks from now, our ideas for tomorrow's speaker will be Ambassador Youssef, the UAE ambassador to the United States, and he will be speaking about the progress that's been made in the UAE at this time. So thank you very much for joining us, and I hope you have a great evening.